Super. So the Moxy Lab develops leaders who communicate with presence through artful speaking and intelligent listening. And that's something we'll go into a little bit more today. And Moxy means courage, verve, and know-how. Because to communicate effectively, we need to have courage to really be able to speak truthfully. We need our own authentic presence, which is that verve quality. And we also need skill. And this is not just skill in effective, clear writing, but skills in connecting with other people, skills in managing our own emotions, skills in listening. So today I want to give you an overview of what it means to have masterful communication and some tools that you can walk away with and start to implement right away. Good, it works. So we all communicate to have impact. All humans, from the moment we're born and scream out, we are communicating to make connections, to inspire some kind of change in the environment, some kind of change with the individuals around us. And to really have that impact, we need to draw on all of us. All of us. The skills, and then also the presence, who we are as people, is just as important. Now, a lot of this has really depends on not just our inner presence at the moment, so it's our emotional health, our mental health, our physical health. I mean, how many of you try to sit through meetings when you have a head cold? It's really hard to stay present. So really having impact is really about developing ourselves as human beings. Pardon me.
Shana, point to the other point.
Thank you. Whoops. So at the Moxy Lab, we talk about both the range and the depth of presence in communication. And the range really is that full spectrum of writing, messaging, listening, and speaking. But then the depth is about how grounded, how centered we are as people, and how much of our own values and our own presence are we able to bring out in every moment. And that's hard. Sometimes we're on it, sometimes we're not on it. And so part of the skills that are important to have is when we're off our game, what do we need to do to get back on it? What do we need to do to get back and reconnect? Because just a couple minutes of just being off can really make communication awkward, uncomfortable, and challenging. And why is this so important? So it's important not just in our personal life, but in our business lives. Now, LinkedIn every year produces a study, and they look at what are the job skills that are lacking and what is needed to keep up with the pace of innovation and growth in the coming years. And the 2019 report of the greatest skills gap surprised me. Of course, it delighted me as well, because it wasn't in the realm of online security, which is a huge problem. It wasn't in the realm of programming. It wasn't any technical skill. It wasn't even artificial intelligence. It was human intelligence. Most specifically, communication with emotional intelligence. So as more and more technology emerges, the ability to really connect as a human and listen to each other is becoming more and more important, particularly when everyone is distracted and being tweeted and pinged and ponged and texted left and right. Our attention is just getting so fractured, and our attention spans are just getting shrinking every day. So those of us who can learn to manage our attention, manage our presence, we will be the leaders of tomorrow, managing our own attention. Now, before we go any deeper, I want you to consider, why are you here today? This is not a rhetorical question, and it's not a metaphysical question either. Consider for a moment, why did you choose to spend this hour here? You could be out walking, going for a walk. You could be doing any other thing. So consider why you came here. What was it about that Communicate with Moxy that appealed to you? And I want to give you a few minutes and talk to the person next to you. What are some communication challenges that you have? Go ahead, talk amongst yourself, and if virtual people, when you're at home, write down what are some of the communication challenges that you have, that you need some support on. Join a group of 3. You don't have to be in pairs. So I'll give you guys just another minute so I can start to make sure everyone has spoken. All right, let's wrap it up. Are there any brave souls out here who would be willing to share what are some of the challenges you manage? Because guess what? You're not going to be the only one.
Well, you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for you to drift off and start thinking about your shopping list or what you did this morning or what you have to do this afternoon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who else has that issue? Particularly in a meeting, or if someone has a long-winded thing they're explaining, you can start to, for sure. What else? Yeah.
Just to increase my voice and my influence, especially in our society, people, their attention span is so decreased because they're used to looking at their phone in blips.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to communicate concisely, but still have your voice heard.
Right, right, and that's beautiful. That's the other side, what you were talking about. But dealing with the fact that attention spans are minute, and yeah, how do you get to the point and keep people engaged? Yeah. Communication is hard. It definitely is, and it's particularly hard when you're in large organizations, when you have hundreds of people trying to communicate with each other and trying to share the same vision. It gets really hard. The Fortune 500 wastes nearly $160 billion, that's with a B, $billion every year due to communication errors. And that can be due to ineffective meetings, poor messaging, both in speaking and in writing, and poor listening. Do you know 30% of all emails are written to clarify another email? And research on listening shows that we misinterpret, misunderstand, omit, forget, or simply don't hear about 75% of everything we supposedly are listening to. That's enormous. And on a more personal level, in terms of your own career development, 83% of learning executives report that communication is a critical key for leadership success. And one of the key things that is looked for when granting promotions or hiring people. And 26% of all decisions, right, if you have two people with pretty much the same experience, identical resumes, it's a person who has more traits of executive presence and communication that's going to advance. So it's important. But what is presence? That's a word that's thrown around a lot, and you see tips and tricks to have more presence and influence. But what does it mean to you? Again, not a rhetorical question. I want you to think about a leader that you admire. And it can be someone in entertainment or politics or business, some leader that really you feel has presence. And what kind of qualities does this person have? What traits? What skills? How do they make you feel? Confidence. What are some more qualities of presence? What?
They're usually really engaging. Like they listen mindfully and they look at the person that's talking to them and they're very engaged in the activity and the conversation.
They're engaging, they listen, they have good eye contact. So they really show interest in actually who they're communicating with. Any others? What about on this side? Own the room. Own the room. What does that mean?
Take control of the room.
Take control of the room. Right on. So presence really has some different aspects. And presence is going to be different depending on the environment. Right? We're going to have a different kind of communication presence if we're talking with an executive than we are when we're talking to a first grader or our best friends. We naturally switch the way we communicate. Our vocal tone changes, or some of our gestures can change, and this is called code switching. And we do it intuitively, we do it naturally. Last weekend I was at Wash Park. It was a gorgeous day and I'm walking around and I had this little mop of a dog just kind of come and bump into my leg. And I turned around and just, oh my gosh, you're so cute. And I had a really pleasant exchange with the owner of the dog. Totally nice, totally appropriate. Now if I talk to my partner in that same tone of voice, oh John, I love the presentation you designed. Not only do I sound totally loopy, it might be a little insulting. So there's that appropriateness to how we communicate in different environments. And presence has both an external component, and that has to do with our voice and body language, some of the words we choose, our appearance. And that requires, to really resonate with the environment, it requires both an awareness of what the codes are in that environment, and then an agility, an ability to switch in and out of that. And when one is not in the majority demographic in an environment, some of those codes are hard to parse. It's a little harder. Now, the internal aspect of presence, that doesn't shift. That's who we are. That's grounded. That's grounded in our values. And from our values, we have intentions. What do we want to do with those values? What do we want to do in the world? And it's through our message and through how we express that we have an impact. Which is why we say that our outer depends on inner. Our inner state creates our outer expression, and that determines how we're going to be received in the environment. It also is responsible for how we make others feel, because really, if we're not inspiring emotion in others, if they don't care, we haven't made a connection. So looking at the codes in the business world, research has been conducted over the past several decades by different institutions that have identified specific traits, habits, behaviors of leaders in business. And some of these are very expressed, like your body language, a strong voice. Some of them are less obvious, like visionary or gravitas. And what's important to know, and why it's important to know this, is because this can impact your career. It can impact your pay. So understanding these codes helps us to be able to communicate most effectively in this environment. And because this is the DISH Women's Network here, it's important to note that standards of executive presence, standards of communication are not the same for everyone. There are different paradoxes and different biases, let's just call it out, that people have to navigate in communicating in business. And most of the qualities of executive presence are communication skills, so they can be developed. Even if it's not your natural state to be, executive type, they're skills you can develop if you choose. So though we hold equity to be of value, both culturally, nationally, we're clearly not there yet. And we're still not at equity with pay, right? Women are still 82 cents for every dollar their male colleague earns. And yet it's even more challenging for women of color, with African American women earning only 68 cents on the dollar and Latinas earning 62. So these challenges and expectations are there, and they're different for other people. So understanding these is very important, both for our own receptivity for each other and understanding, and also for ourselves in communicating and knowing that, yeah, things are not totally at parity at this point, so what I'm navigating is not just me, and that's helpful to know. And a lot of these things show up in communication, which is why I'm bringing them up. On average, women are interrupted about 33% more often than their male colleagues. They're also judged for vocal traits, speech, and appearance in a very different way than male colleagues are. And this does have an impact: promotions, pays, and elections. And particularly women in leadership have certain paradoxes they navigate. And too far on one side, and you can get criticized; too far on the other, and you have a hard time as well. For example, being too cold, ice queen, versus being emotional or angry, right? You got to find your own balance there. Or likable versus being authoritative. If you're too authoritative and not likable, well, people don't want to follow what you have to say. So this tightrope is something that everyone walks. That balance between authenticity and the expectations of the environment. And there's no right way to do it. No tips or tricks here. But the good news is that research does show that networks like this do support and have a significant impact on job satisfaction, promotions, even pay. So thumbs up to DISH Women's Network, and I understand there's an African American network, a VETS network. So DISH is really at the forefront, because having that kind of support can change culture. So though we're all managing this tightrope, we're going to look at some very specific aspects of communication and see what we can do to be a little bit more powerful in how we communicate. Now, body language is one of those things that it's bam, people feel it immediately. It's the way you walk into the room, the way you take up space. Before you ever open up your mouth, you're making that impression. Yet most of us aren't really aware of what our body is communicating. And there are habits we have, whether it's over gesticulating, my thing, or whether it's being frozen or crossing or whatever these awkward habits are, slouching. So with body language, it's important to note that, boy, there are hundreds or thousands of tips and tricks online about what body language means, right? Have you guys seen these? Don't sit to your side. Don't put your hands in your pocket. Oh, if you put your arms across, that means you're unreceptive and closed off. Take these with a grain of salt because there's not a lot of research behind all of these. And a lot of times people cross their arms because they're contemplative and thinking, or cold. Simple. The important thing about body language is to note, is there anything that is distracting or diminishing your own presence? Sometimes we don't know. And that's why I would encourage all of you to find a trusted friend, a trusted colleague who can share observations with each other. Share both what's physically happening. Oh, in that meeting I saw you shrink. Were you feeling this way? Or so sharing both what's physically happening and kind of the emotional tone that's being projected, because it's hard to know. I myself, a communications expert, I was in a training a couple years ago, and in the training we had partners and we were noticing each other's body language throughout the day. And believe me, in a day, all the weird tics come out. At the end of the day, she told me that during the training, particularly when they were explaining a new idea, my eyebrows got really furrowed, my eyes narrowed, and my head kind of tilted to the side. What kind of tone does that have to you guys? Disbelief, questioning, skeptical. Not the kind of feeling I want to put out there. When I'm really curious and trying to solve a problem or trying to see how things put together, apparently that's what my face does. I had no idea. So with some awareness, I've been able to notice. I still do it sometimes, of course, but I notice, ooh, I don't want this person to feel like I am tearing them apart. So having that awareness, you can start to shift. The more important thing, though, is to know what you want to emulate. Instead of focusing on what you don't want to do, focus on what you want more of. And for body language, the most important thing is good posture. Grounded, knees and ankles and hips and shoulders in alignment, chest open. This way you actually get more oxygen into your body, you breathe more deeply. And when we get more oxygen into our brain, we think more clear. We have more energy. And because the body and the emotions and the mind are so intimately connected, if you're not feeling quite right on the inside, you can shift your body to change the internal state. Drifting off in a meeting, ooh, sit up straight. Breathe in. You've got an uncomfortable conversation. Go up and down a couple flights of stairs, get the heart pumping, and it'll change what's going on inside. Now, voice is a very often overlooked aspect of communication, and yet the voice is an incredible tool for expression. Through our pitch and speed and volume, we are able to color our language like a painter uses different colors to evoke emotions on a canvas. And yet a lot of us spend most of our time just kind of talking in this middle tone because, well, that's professional and it's not emotional. Think about how many of you can imagine Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I have a dream. Just how many of you can just imagine that? If you don't know it, go home and listen to it, because that speech is the most masterful example of vocal richness and prosody. And the way he uses his voice, he uses a deep, resonating sound to create gravitas. And then when he's trying to create excitement, it's faster, and then it gets higher, and then silence. Silence creates impact and is almost never used. So do you know your voice? Do you know what might be distracting or diminishing in your speech and in your voice? Most of us don't know our voice because we can't accurately hear it because we got this big noggin that's in the way. So again, having that friend that can give us good feedback, recording our voice, that can give us a lot of self-awareness. Now, the following slide shows specific habits and traits of the voice and of speech that have come up numerous times in studies that are shown to be make you seem less credible. And we really value content mostly over expression, but it's important to know how your expression might be impacting others. And there is considerable research that shows a statistically significant correlation between lower pitched voices and higher pay. A lot of, yeah, so some of these things affect women more than men, but it's true across the board. Another habit that really can damage credibility is upspeak. And if you don't know upspeak is like when the end of your sentences goes up as if like you're asking a question when you're really giving a statement. It makes you sound like you don't actually believe what you are saying. Lowers the credibility. Then there's that gravelly kind of cool, disaffected, hey, everything's awesome, vocal fry. That can really communicate disengagement. And then there's my favorite one, which I've had to struggle with, which is the filler words. Like, how many people say like with every other word? Could you imagine? Like, I have a dream, I believe. Yeah, those likes really do lower the power of your message, the power of your presence. I was going up to the mountains with my husband about 7 years ago, and I got on the call with one of my friends from California, so it was all like, hey, and he was like, yeah. And I got off the phone after 10 minutes, and he said, you said like about 18 times in that conversation. 1 like per minute is too much. But again, knowing what these habits are, having this awareness, at first it can be a little jarring because you're hyper aware of what you're doing or saying. But the more important thing then is to focus on what you want to develop. And for filler words, slowing down, breathing. We throw in a lot of filler words because we're afraid of losing the attention. We're trying to connect one idea to the other. Slow down. If you're in a valuable conversation, people will actually appreciate that little pause. Then there are specific words that come up again and again, very often for women, but a lot of people use these words that diminish our presence and our authority. We're diminishing words, just, almost, actually, I think we should probably have a meeting to recalculate the new numbers because we got new data. Actually, I almost thought. Strike those out. Or apologizing. Sorry, excuse me, I don't want to interrupt, but the office is burning, so I think maybe we should leave. Maybe, I don't know for sure. Or questioning. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. Just make a request. make a clear statement. And if it's appropriate, if the atmosphere calls for it, put a little extra warmth in it. Give some appreciation when you're taking charge. So having this knowledge allows us to either develop new traits, new skills, or to embrace the differences that we have. Now, Margaret Thatcher was one of the longest running prime ministers of the United Kingdom. And when she first started her career, she was in Parliament, and she had a very high-pitched lady British voice, like she's going for tea, very much in her head, up like that. And she was criticized in the media and by others as having a shrill voice. She was aware of what the standards of her environment were, that in politics, a lower toned voice, a more booming, resonant voice from the chest is going to have more impact and convey more power. So she actually started taking lessons, voice lessons, and lowered her octave, her pitch, almost an octave. So it's interesting, if you go online, you can hear the difference in her early career and later career. She, of course, was elected prime minister, was the first woman to lead a major political party in the UK, and later became known as the Iron Lady. Very different tone. On the other hand, so yeah, awareness, training, and practice. That's how you develop new traits. But you can also just embrace what's different. Alicia Keys is one of the most talented musicians. She has been nominated for 29 Grammys. I think she was won 16. She hosted the Grammys this year. Years ago, she decided, I'm done. I'm not wearing makeup. I'm wearing my hair natural. And she's in an industry that demands glamour, that defines the industry. So it's really about having choice and knowing what the impact's going to be in the environment. So we've looked at both our body and breath and our voice and how that influences the environment around us. But I want to also look at our mind and emotions, because you are your tool of communication, and each of those components is necessary to be that kind of communicator we want to be. How many of you guys feel this way after specific meetings? Yeah, you know that one? Or maybe a certain colleague. Or maybe you feel like this before you have to present a new idea to your team. Guess what, guys? We've been going this way, but we're going that way now. These kinds of challenging communications create all sorts of emotional responses and physical responses. Right? How many of you feel the temperature change in these challenging communications? Right? It can be the temperature rising and your face turning red, or maybe you get colder and you get trembly and your mouth gets dry. Who's had this experience? Yeah, could be in a challenging conversation. Ever talk politics with a family member? How well do we communicate in these situations when we're activated like this? Do you communicate according to your values in those situations? I know, I stumble and bleh, my words just aren't quite where I want them to be. Now here's why. It's because our amygdala, that little peanut-sized organ behind the hippocampus, it is responsible for our survival. It was developed to prepare us for an attacking saber-toothed tiger. It triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response to respond to threats. And while it is brilliant in that it can detect a threat like that in milliseconds, it's also a little stupid in that it really can't tell the difference between the saber-toothed tiger and a challenging colleague. To the amygdala, all threats are the same. And so it will sacrifice accuracy for speed. To keep us alive, we need to react immediately, which is why the heart rate goes up, why that energy intensifies, so that we can respond. Unfortunately, when the amygdala is activated, the prefrontal cortex slows down. And that's what's responsible for rational thought, discernment, reason, and language. So it's no wonder we have a hard time listening and speaking when we're in these challenging communication situations. So the most effective thing in communication, because we're always going to have those challenges, is to know how to get back to our rational mind when we've got those physical experiences happening. And here are a few ways to do that. One is simply to get curious about what's going on. Curiosity is a prefrontal cortex kind of activity. What's going on here? Asking the person, tell me more. Asking yourself, is there something I'm missing? Is there something I can learn? So getting that curiosity going is important. Another phenomenon, which is fantastic, it was discovered in a lab, it's called cognitive reappraisal. And cognitive reappraisal simply means that changing the story of what's going on can change our experience of it. How many of you like roller coasters? What about downhill skiing? Any skydivers, perhaps? No, me neither. That's crazy. So we do all of these things that can actually kill us. Why? They're fun, absolutely. And yet the exact same neurophysiology, the reactions, the stomach clenching, the heartbeat that happens when we're on a roller coaster is the same as when we're in a situation of stress and challenge. But we call it fun. So shift your perspective about fear in communication or anxiety as excitement. Oh my gosh, I'm giving a big presentation. Is it fear or is it energy? Is it excitement? And then conflict. Conflict is passionate engagement. People get into conflict because they care deeply about what they're talking about. So get curious. Why are they so passionate about it? And particularly at work, conflict is essential for innovation. Healthy conflict, that is. Healthy conflict where we're actually listening to each other. Caveat here, sometimes it doesn't work. We can't think ourselves out of frustration or anxiety sometimes, and making a mood is only going to lower your credibility and turn people off. In that situation, we use tools of mindfulness. Tools that can bring us more grounded in the moment, reconnect us to our breath, and connect us to the actual atmosphere. What's happening in the moment? Because most of the fear, anxiety, frustration is because we're projecting into the future or hanging on to something in the past where our breath and our body are right here in the moment. Now, if there are two things that I would love to see taught in every single company and every organization in the world, it would be tools of mindfulness and skillful listening. Just in my business, I have seen people transform just by developing listening, effective listening, listening intelligence. And research backs this up. The most innovative and profitable companies are ones where people listen to each other. That's where we have the most dynamic engagement in teams, where we can hear each other and listen to these differences. It's also one of the critical skills in effective leadership. And a 2014 study from the University of Texas showed that effective listening improved sales by developing trust and credibility, making the customer feel valued. And in each of these reports where they felt that they were heard, they anticipated future work with that person. So the effects are very tangible and real. What's exciting is that there is a whole field of research and work around the science of listening. And scientists at different universities have found that people listen differently. And people, the way we listen, it's a habit. It's not a hardwired trait. How many of you guys have taken a listening class? No. So did you? You have? Good. So we have one representative. Yay! The most I ever heard, and boy, I heard it a lot, was sit crisscross applesauce and zip up the lip. That was my listening training. Whereas speaking and writing, math, all of these other things that we learn, we get feedback on. We get critiqued, we change, we develop. And yet, listening is just sort of developed as a habit. You're either a good listener or a bad listener, meh, and that's it. So it's no wonder we're so bad at it. But the good news is because it's a habit, habits can change. Listening is a brain-based activity. We hear with our ears, which is phonic and sound-oriented, but we create meaning with our brains. And because each of us has a different brain, we're wired differently, we hear different things. Each one of you is going to come away from this talk with a totally different interpretation of what was said. That's just how people listen. But the problem is that we have listening preferences, so there's information that we hold as well. That's credible, that's valuable. And we tune out in other areas, just habitually, just meh, I'm not going to pay attention to that. So with this knowledge of listening, the science of listening, the echo-listening profile was developed with psychometricians at the University of Mississippi, University of San Francisco, and it is a scientifically validated assessment that identifies specific listening habits of an individual. It shows what are you listening to, what are you tuning out. And with this awareness, we can begin to expand our listening capacity so that we're taking in a broader range of information. Or we can prepare ourselves if we're going into a meeting that is challenging. Oh, I need to listen differently in this situation. And where it gets really cool is we start to be able to identify different kinds of listening habits in others so that we can speak to their preferences. We can communicate to people the way they want to be spoken to, the way that they listen for. That way our receptivity is like that, the understanding is improved, and this is what we call listening intelligence. Now, if I had another hour here, I'd go way into this and tell you about the 4 different habits and looking at body language and the words they spoke, but that'll have to be another time. I do have a handout that has just some good principles for effective listening, more on the behavioral side. So take a look at that when you're done. And I also have principles on effective presentations. And presentations we like to call the Olympics of communication. Right? You have to really tune up that voice and body language and speech, all of those skills. So you can take a look at that afterwards. But before we end, I want you to turn back to the person you were talking to, or if you're online, go ahead and get out your pen, and ask yourself, the communication challenge that you identified at the beginning, is there another way you could handle this? Or is there any little takeaways from this talk that you can begin to implement immediately? And is there 1 or 2 things about your voice or body language that you would like to develop? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes here. Talk to the person next to you. Identify something that you want to work on. Give you a couple minutes here. And for bonus points, folks, check in with each other in a week. See if you're actually focusing on this development goal. A little accountability always helps. Okay, so let's wrap this up. So to conclude, our communication impacts our environment. And we want that impact to be the most nourishing and supportive it can be. And to really be present with others, we have to be grounded and present in ourselves. Because that's how we truly start to make connections. That's how we start to have influence. And though we spend time focusing on skills development, developing skills that will help us to be more understood and skills to augment our credibility, equally important is that we have grace with both ourselves and others so that we don't judge each other on, like, you know, the filler words and stuff, or on the distracting and diminishing quirks of our communication. And to harken back to Dr. King's speech, let's create a culture where we're evaluating each other not by the communication quirks or by how we look, but by the content of our message. That we're listening to what someone's saying, not so much how they're saying it. What is being said, and that we judge each other on that and the content of our character. So I'm not going anywhere. If you guys have any questions, I will stick around. I've sent around an email list. We don't really send out much of a newsletter, but from time to time we'll let you know if things are happening. If you have any questions at all, if you want to see some of the research, because we dig deep for all the principles we use. We dig deep and find research to support it. So if you want to know about the research, if you have any specific questions, please contact us. And you can contact me, or you can contact John. He's in the back, and he is the master of masterful messaging. He's the wordsmith. He's also the statistician, numbers, data guy. So if you have any questions about that, talk to him. And thank you all for spending this time with me.